Hey there, Friday Night Movie fans. This week, we have an incredible episode of the Friday Night Movie podcast for you. It's so jam-packed with content that we actually have to divide it into two. The amazing Esther Kustanowitz, author, writer, journalist, joined us. She's an expert on representation of Jewish people in the media and in general an expert on covering pop culture. And she was kind enough to join us for almost 2 full hours. In this first hour, we tackled the horrific events that took place in Texas over the weekend, the hostage situation at the Beth Israel synagogue, and we talked about our own personal reactions to it. Then we talked a little bit about pop culture, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll get into part 2. And then in part 2, which will drop on Friday at our usual time, you'll have more discussion and much of the usual pop culture shenanigans as we continue the conversation with Esther. We had a lot of fun chatting with her. She was extremely generous with her time. You should also check out her podcast, The Bagel Report. She hosts with Aaron Ben Moshe, which tackles a lot of great issues around Jewish identity and Jewish representation in media. And again, we are so grateful to her for joining our show this week. I'm so excited to present to you part 1 of our 2-part episode with Esther Kustanowitz. Enjoy. Here we are, and welcome to, I think, a very Jewish episode of the Friday Night Movie podcast. I mean, every episode of the Friday Night Movie podcast is pretty Jewish, but every once in a while, we really dig into our peoplehood, and today we're going to do it. We have an amazing guest with us. We have Esther Kustanowitz, journalist, writer, communicator extraordinaire, and host of The Bagel Report, which is an outstanding podcast. If you're following me on social media, I was introduced to it recently, and I'm absolutely in love with it. Esther, we're introducing you up front because we're dropping you right into the family, right into the cockpit of the family.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. My family's far away, and so it means a lot to me to be able to be connected with another family that's also far away. So
yeah, we are. Well, we already love having you. I feel like I know you not only because you know the great Leah Jones of Finding Favorites fame. And Flo Low, but
yes, best name ever.
But your podcast is I think like the voice of our people. I didn't know how much it was until I listened to it. So people got to listen to that podcast.
Wow.
Oh yeah, it's awesome.
The voice of our people is severely underpaid, but thank you.
You know, one of our mottos on the Friday Night Movie podcast and the podcasting world in general is you got to spend money to lose money. So
yes.
That's
relatable.
It's about passion. But what we are here we're gonna kick off with today is something quite serious. We usually promise you nothing timely or serious on the Friday Night Movie podcast. This is being taped on Monday, Martin Luther King Day.
Tu B'Shvat.
Also, we're Tu B'Shvat. So this is an auspicious day in a lot of ways, but it is also 2 days after,
which is like Earth Day for Jews.
Oh yeah, it's Jewish Earth Day. Sorry, that's Tu B'Shvat. Just to sum it up quickly, this is also 2 days after the horrific standoff hostage incident in Texas at the Beth Israel synagogue, and we want to take a moment, and again, having Esther with us, who is an expert, it is really incredible. An expert on the Jewish world, I'm labeling you. I hope that's okay. Is that a good title for you?
Sure. I mean, Jews, we're complicated people. So like, just when you think you're an expert on something crazy happens and nobody's an expert anymore. It's like the internet.
Exactly. But, yeah. There's a lot of, yes, I guess we're all experts. So we have Esther with us, and it's we're lucky to have her on this day because we're going to take a moment to just react and talk about what happened in Texas, and then segue that into a conversation about Jews and pop culture, because everyone came here to listen to us talk about pop culture. I want to start with Becky, though. I want to turn to Becky first, because in our own family discussion, Becky had a great observation of something a dear friend of ours posted. And I'd love it, Beck, if you could just reflect on that
So
before we
dear
all-
friend of the podcast and of the family, Noah Allen, the morning after the hostage situation, he posted on his Instagram a photograph of you can tell he's davening in it. He's praying.
Davening means praying.
And essentially saying that thankfully this morning we're not saying the mourner's Kaddish, but we're able to say this other prayer. And the prayer is essentially it's thanking God for who sets captives free, sets captives free. And I was really impacted by Noah's post. It's something I've been thinking about a lot the last few days. That
a mourner's Kaddish would be a prayer that you would say for someone who died.
Someone who dies, and someone did die. The hostage taker, the terrorist, did die. So it's not like there were no deaths in the situation, but we are. I'm feeling very, very lucky that
as a community,
as a community that we are able to instead, take a moment of reflection and be thankful that they were freed ultimately, or that they freed themselves. I think that's from what I understand from hearing more about the story. So Thank you, Noah, actually, for sharing that post and that prayer.
Yeah, that to me, I'm glad it's still a horrifying set of events, but I'm glad that's what we're reflecting on first, is gratitude for folks being freed.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it still sucks that someone died. I think so. That's something that stood with me. Lily, how did you feel about that incident? We live in a country, Esther, Shai, and Becky, surrounded by Jews. You are in an island in the middle of the ocean in Spain, where Jews were kicked out 500 years ago. You don't run into a lot of Jews. A synagogue being attacked isn't even on the radar.
Right. I would say it's a blessing and a curse. Blessing being that you don't get bombarded with nasty comments or media about it, being stuff like, well, it wasn't a Jewish issue. This wasn't about Jews, and stuff in this media. And, maybe people not, being careless on social media and stuff. However, it's also not on anyone's radar. And so I think that makes it, I think it's in a good way, which is it's sad that that's good. And it's also sad that it's not on people's radar here, but it's also, it may have been in the Spanish news. I wouldn't be surprised if it was. And I don't think that anybody I know saw it. I know that the people that know me, had they seen it, would have reached out. So it's not like the non-Jews that I'm friends with are not, caring, empathetic people. That's not the issue here. It's just probably not even, on anyone's radar, which is often, I think, like I said, blessing in disguise. Can be nice to not have to answer for it or explain it all the time and have to deal with that. But it's also nobody's aware of this awful thing that's happening right now in real time. And then already happened and passed, and it was never on anyone's, not going to send out a blast on WhatsApp about it. So it's isolating, but honestly, with the way things can be so toxic online, I'm at the point where I don't really mind being alone with this, because I have you guys and the people in the US, and I don't need any other negative crap to deal with. But, while you've, given me the spotlight, I will say that or do you want to just go around and then you'll
maybe I'll go around. Leave us in suspense.
Sorry.
Esther, how about you? How about you? You are a Jewish person, but you also cover the Jewish world professionally.
I am a Jewish person, and I do cover the Jewish world professionally. Yeah, look, there's a lot of levels to an event like this, and the first one is obviously emotional and shock, and just the way it unfolded in such an elongated fashion over the course of 10 hours. And the incessant media coverage of basically nothing for those 10 hours, which I often I'm really grateful to live in a world where I can know that things are happening, but I also resent the expectation that that news media need to constantly replay the same footage over and over again, which it became, I don't know if you were watching CNN, but they had the same footage of people getting out of the bus and doing a fist bump. There was like these two guys who came out of the SWAT team vehicle. One of them met the other one and they did a fist bump, and then they just like went and did whatever they needed to do. But I thought it was such a weird little moment, this fist bump, that I started noticing when it looped back. And they looped the footage, and there was like maybe like 6 or 7 images from outside of the synagogue that you just kept showing over and over again. And for me, like, you know, I don't have necessarily any association with these spaces. I know there's something terrible going on, but I was reminded of when 9/11 happened, and they kept reshowing the towers falling over and over again, and the information loop that even if you know it's not happening over and over again, it's like creating a cycle of media induced trauma. And so that was part of the experience yesterday. The day before yesterday. But another thing that I was also struck by is that Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker, who is the rabbi who was held hostage and who, according to several accounts, actually was the person who liberated himself and the hostages before the terrorist died. And so I was also struck by the fact that in my social media spaces, a lot of people were talking about how they knew him, and I don't know him. But he and I have 30 friends in common. And so, wow. And I saw how his situation also was impacting people that I know, and drawing that connective link between a synagogue in Texas where I don't know anyone, to my heart in Los Angeles and my network, and how it created an impact.
Which is the very essence of Jew, like that's the very essence of being Jewish,
right?
I feel like that.
Yeah, it really, social media does engage our instinct to play Jewish geography, which I have said on my podcast before, that like I feel like that instinct goes all the way back to Anatevka, when, you know, which obviously not being a real place, but in
Fiddler on the Roof, yeah.
Right, in Fiddler on the Roof, when the spoiler alert, they're forced to leave their village in Eastern Europe, and one of them is going to Chicago, America, and the other one is going to New York, America, and he says, "Congratulations, we'll be neighbors." You know, because the idea is that those two places in America, which is so far away, are close together, even though it's Chicago and New York. So I love that social media connects us and enables us to say, oh, you're a Jew in Texas, America. I'm a Jew in Los Angeles, America. Doesn't mean we don't know people in common, which I think is a remarkable thing to be able to acknowledge and be part of. And it links you on a deeper basis.
And I think that the social media reaction is something that, especially in the days of the pandemic, right? We've all been at home. There's not that we'd be able to go down to Texas, now that we go down to Texas, but we're all sort of locked in and watching everything unfold, and digitally a lot of the time. And in addition to the horror and the personal trauma, right? This is a fear that I think every Jewish person lives with all the time, that something could happen to your synagogue, that your synagogue's a soft target, your house is a soft target. This is something that I've been nervous about. And especially if you've traveled outside of the United States. The United States, we've been really lucky. We don't have armed guards at our synagogue, but having been to synagogues in Guatemala, in France,
or in Spain, they just look normal buildings.
Yeah,
there's have to get markings. Like there was nothing. You would never know it's a synagogue.
So you have to, we have to give your passports in advance to go to the one in Guatemala, and so that sanctity, that safety bubble, has been breaking. And this was one of those frightening moments, like the Tree of Life, and not the same as the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh. Right. One of those moments that reminds you. The other piece that kept going on in my head, and has been happening more and more, is whether I want to or not, there is this inclination to look at how people are reacting, particularly famous people. And I don't know,
like the popular kids at school.
Yeah, I don't know if it's right or not, but I can't help but look and see, okay, which Jews are checking in. And because, as you said at the beginning, Esther, we're all experts in our own different way. What nuances is everyone coming at this about? Who's talking about this in terms of anti-Semitism? Who's talking about this in terms of
thoughts and prayers, whatever.
Thoughts and prayers, politics, gun violence, gun laws. There's lots of different angles to see. But I would say that on our family WhatsApp chains, and I suspect many other Jewish family WhatsApp chains, there's a lot of screenshotting. Oh, look what so-and-so said.
Yeah.
And there is a comfort that I feel when someone says something that I feel like connects with me. Like there's this anxiety that my personal reaction might be some kind of an outlier because already.
Well, yeah, because everything is right. But, and also I feel like, getting back to your original point, or when you started talking about this point, you know, we've been in this sort of tunnel, and it's hard, it's hard to gauge sometimes if our reaction is rational, reasonable, measured. And so every little thing might trigger you now, right? Because you've literally all been in this bizarre situation that involves us staring at our phones a lot of the time and in our own little world. And so the slightest little thing might like royally piss you off that maybe 2 years ago you would have not even thought about because you were so busy going out and doing all these other things. And so when something happens, it's sort of like, wait, hold on, I have to just, and it's happened to me with you guys. Wait, are they also upset about that? Is this something to be upset about? Because I could be upset about everything. And so, not that celebrities tell us what we can and can't be upset about. However, we, the three of us, look generally to pop culture for a lot of answers to things.
Well, I think it's a function of micro societies, right? And spheres of influence. So like the three of you are like a micro society, like within your own family. And then that's like the macro society. But still, there's reason to believe that members of a family might feel or react similarly to something, not same, but similarly, because you grew up with similar influences. So there's every reason to believe that might happen. But the question of, the celebrities who have self-identified as Jewish in a major and public way, we look to them as the most famous members of our family that we never see. They don't call, they don't write, but we follow what they do. We follow. Oh, we're very proud of them. We're very proud of Josh Molina. But we may have never met him, but like, we are proud of the things that he's doing to represent Judaism in the world. We don't always necessarily agree everything he says all the time, but we appreciate the honesty of his process of identifying as Jewish in a public sphere, especially in the Hollywood ecosystem. So I think that all of that is part of what we're looking for. And when we're really looking to, as social beings, be in a space that we feel safe, especially after having had a safe space like a synagogue invaded. And if that's not a safe space, then let's kind of regroup and circle the wagons, as I think they used to do in the olden times, and just say, these are our people. What do we think? How are we reacting to this? How are we processing the trauma? How are we putting it into context in an overall world that's pretty broken and has a lot of hatred in it? And where do we fit into that picture? And also because, we could get into a whole intersectionality conversation where we can talk about or we can talk about David Baddiel's book about Jews Don't Count, or Horn. I forgot her first name. Dara Horn's People Love Dead Jews. The idea of where do we fit into this conversation on hate crimes if we are not being oppressed because necessarily of the color of our skin, and because we have this or because of sexual orientation or gender identity, or any of the reasons that people have hate crimes perpetrated against them. And at what point are we allowed to say anti-Semitism is still a problem? And there is still anti-Jewish sentiment, and we don't like that, and we don't want it to exist, just because we also don't want these other kinds of hatred to exist. And if we say anything about that, then inevitably there's a disconnect for some people who are saying, well, Jews aren't suffering the same as other people who are suffering. And the goal should really be nobody is suffering because of who they are, what they look like, how they believe, how they love, any of those things, unless what you love is white supremacy. I have zero tolerance policy for that. But, I think that there's a lot of confusion about where we fit into this conversation about hate crimes. And I think you're seeing that with the conversation around who this guy was and what he was and wasn't saying, that he had no problem with Jews. Like, he just wanted this person who had a problem with Jews freed. So, like, what does that mean?
And he used Jews to try to
of the reaction
at a synagogue, right?
Right. That of all the places he could have picked, and the parsing, and I think that's something that we feel is that the picking of the synagogue isn't in a vacuum. It's not random. It's part of a drip.
But I feel like we could talk about this for hours and hours.
So Esther,
before
go ahead.
I don't know if we were planning to move on, but before we move on, I also just want to point out that that Rabbi Citron Walker has been really modeling what it means to be a presence who is devoted to generosity of spirit and community building throughout this whole thing. I mean, I don't know if you've seen, there was a CBS interview with him where I posted on my Facebook if you want to see it, but it was really a remarkable picture of somebody who has been through trauma and is still processing that trauma as he's being asked to relive it on TV, but still managed to end with a message of gratitude, both to the community and to the Muslim and Christian members of the community who had come out in support of him, and in support of the community, which is itself devoted to these kinds of interfaith conversations and connections. And I thought that was really, really beautiful. And I'm really worried for him. Like, I really want him to get some help because I feel like it's too soon to just be jumping back into this trauma. But I think that the fact that he was able to model this kind of,
I didn't even look for an interview. Yeah. I
read about the interview, and, when you said, your point is excellent, because I've also read that in several sources where they used hostages in quotation marks. That diminishes what this man went through. But just because you survive a hostage situation and you're Jewish, I guess, doesn't mean you weren't a hostage. So, I hope that he can move, like you're saying, I was very impressed. I read about the interview and I didn't get to watch it, but I read about it and I was like, wow, how well spoken, like, what media training does this guy have that he's so well spoken after probably anybody would be blubbering. I guess he is. That's the good media training. But he's so well spoken and eloquent and clearly going through something horrible. And I was like, well, I hope that doesn't make people think it's not a big deal in a weird way, because it is very much a big deal. And you don't get to put that Shai, you had asked, like, was there something that bothered you or whatever about how people have reacted to this? That's the thing that's like majorly bothered me, is that hostages is in quotation marks, because, we should, at least for the people who went through this, treat it as serious as it was.
Well, I think that it happens a lot with media coverage, where people will circulate an article without reading it, where people will look at a headline and think they know the whole story, where people will read an interview and they view it the same thing as if they've seen it with their own eyes, and it's not equivalent. Like, I've read interviews with him, with Rabbi, and until I saw this interview, I was like, holy crap. Like, the impact of this is still so fresh. And I started crying when I was watching him in the video, and I'm like tearing up just thinking about it now. And that doesn't really happen to me when I watch, footage of people who are, at a concert where there was a gunman, like, after that Las Vegas shooting, they interviewed people. And I don't know, like, I think part of it is obviously the Jewish connection is making me feel more rooted to it. But I think that it's important to witness it with your own eyes, so you doesn't just get swept up in the flotsam and jetsam of the of media today. There's just so much content, and there was the comment also about the FBI saying that it wasn't like racially, it wasn't Jewishly motivated, or anti-Semitism wasn't the motivation.
How could that even be remotely?
Right.
That's been going around.
And
I mean,
what
that's so deeply hurtful.
So Esther, this is deeply personal for you. You've made the decision to also make part of your career covering Jewish issues in the media. What drives you to do that? How do you get back up and do it? Because it tugs on it in a personal way that covering something more abstract maybe doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, part of it is just knowing when to be a coward and not to cover something that's really like super personal to me. But sometimes it's about talking to people who aren't being heard or whose opinions aren't being represented, but who are very involved in it. Sometimes it's about me, just in a self-indulgent moment, but also like, trying to process the way I feel about something, like doing a cultural analysis or trying to read some meaning into what's happened, or how do we move forward in a positive way from here. I over the course of my career, it's something that I've really relied on my writing to help me process everything that has been challenging for the Jewish community over the last, whatever it is, 20 years. So I've, I remember feeling it acutely after 9/11, which I don't know how much any of you remember about 9/11, but
we're old.
Yeah, well, it's all relative.
We were all
fully formed
adults when that happened.
Adults when it happened.
Well, I never like to assume how old anyone is.
I mean, I appreciate
because I can never tell by looking at them.
Yeah.
But also
I have
my
a youthful
sense,
glow. It's confusing for people.
as do we all. Yes, it's the podcast glow. The faces for radio. But I when I was in New York on 9/11, and so like processing what it was like in New York the weeks after 9/11, like that was something that I did in writing. And because it also happened the same week that Rosh Hashanah was happening. And so there was a lot of, kind of sermonic processing of it by rabbis. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
I was like sermoniacal sometimes. But, rabbis were processing it in sermons. And I was like, well, that's not fair. They get to process it and have people tell them that they're right on or whatever. Like, I want to do that too. So I started writing about like the Book of Life and what it means in a year when this image of the Book of Life that comes around for the high holidays, and what that means when so many people lost their lives in such a horrible way in an instant. And there's so many circles of grief. So like, all of those things were things I managed to like be able to process in writing. In terms of the stuff that I cover, that's not personal in that same way. I like to share stories of people who are engaging in Jewish life and meaning in unusual ways, and who are engaging creatively in what their Jewish identity is, and not just accepting this is what we do because it's the way we've always done it, and they tried to kill us and we survived and let's eat. So, right. What?
That sounds like my life, needing to be creative about Judaism.
Yeah. I mean, those of us who live in major metropolitan Jewish centers don't need to be as creative probably as somebody who lives in an island named after birds. So like, I think in a way, like I went from living in New York to living in Los Angeles, and that's not a really huge difference in terms of having an active Jewish community, having more shuls than anyone could throw a bagel at, like all of those things. So I think that, I know that I'm speaking from a point of privilege on many fronts, but I still feel like the institutionalized Jewish community needs to relax its boundaries a little bit and be more inclusive, whatever that means in a particular organization, and really provide an on-ramp for Jewish engagement and meaning rather than a closed door. And that's really something that I've always been interested in covering and being part of as a movement.
So I'm going to come back to the beginning and say, if you want an on-ramp to engage in Jewish things, everybody, well, not everybody, but anyone who's listening to this podcast likes TV and likes movies, or maybe you hate them, but you like listening to us talk about them. I guess there's some people who are like that too. the Bagel Report, and then TV Gone Jewy is a Facebook group that is that what it exists as, or is it a larger organization?
Yeah, I can tell you everything. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Tell us everything, but those are great on-ramps to engage. Oh, that's sort of like my statement before the question is. Those are great on-ramps to engage Jewishly and find a way into connecting. Esther, you created these. What are they? What are they about? What? Yeah, tell us about them.
Okay. Thanks for asking. I think, I'm glad that you found them both. I have to say that TV Gone Jewy pre-exists the Bagel Report by several years. It was a project, it was just like an internal term for me, myself, and I to talk about the appearance of Jewish content on TV, and a little bit in movies, but obviously TV Gone Jewy, so it's TV. But I was noting that there were a number of content creators and TV shows that seem to feature Jews in more prominent and more meaningful, nuanced roles than just kind of like Dr. Goldstein. We can't wish you a Merry Christmas because you're Jewish, so happy Hanukkah to you. And nobody even talks about it. They just point at a menorah in the corner, and then that's the Jewish content.
The menorah under the tree.
Yes, exactly.
Really aggravates me.
Yeah, because you don't want to light something and put it under a tree. That seems like a bad idea. But I know they mostly use the electric menorahs for that, but still. So yeah, I think that I was noticing it coming up more and more frequently, and was interested when it did so, when it did come up in a more meaningful environment than just like a throwaway line. And I also noticed that there are things happening with Hebrew and Yiddish, while of course, everybody can say schmuck, people say chutzpah. Right. Those were kind of like the baseline words, but then it became kvetch, which is harder to say because people say kavetch, make it two syllables.
There was throwing a Dayenu, and you really got my attention.
That's right.
Okay. I haven't
heard Becky speak a lot.
I'm very fast and I'm very absorbed in what you're saying.
Becky is also the gutsiest member of this team because
I heard the penguin story. I know what's happening. Yeah, going to mug people for their inflatable penguins to help them skate on a rink. Right?
Lily's missed episodes for sickness and surgery.
Becky I had COVID, not surgery. The only time I missed an episode was when I got the real COVID, the original
the OG
one.
COVID. But let's be fair, right. Becky has
surgeries. I've done through multiple surgeries.
Has more than once recorded an episode, gone to the hospital, had a C-section, back for the next episode.
I had surgery 2 weeks ago, but I'm actually mostly fascinated in what you're saying. So I'm riveted. I feel more like an audience member today, but I do have a TV Gone Jewy thing that has been on my mind nonstop for like several months now. I brought it to the family chat. We had a whole family chat discussion about it. I'm looking through your Facebook page and I don't know if it's on there, but maybe you can direct me to where there's a post explaining it to me. On the show, The Expanse, one of the main characters, Amos, has a tattoo that's obviously Hebrew letters. What is it? We like my dad who, and brother who both speak Hebrew, tried to translate it, but couldn't tell what the last letter was. We had all these debates about it. A lot of the internet says
it's a mistranslation. It's kind of hard to.
What is going on? Why does he have that tattoo?
Or is it the actor that has it?
That's a great question. Those are both great questions. I don't watch The Expanse, but nobody has brought that to my attention. So this is what I'm saying.
TV Gone Jewy news.
Oh my God. Breaking news. Breaking TV Gone Jewy.
You can be a cub reporter for TV Gone Jewy news.
Okay, I'm gonna send you a screen capture of his tattoo. Like the first time I think I saw it appear. Great. Not right now. We're in the middle of recording, but I will send it to you and we will have to investigate this.
We'll have words about it. Yeah. I think that's one of the categories of TV Gone Jewy really is these tattoos that seem to appear out of nowhere. And what do they mean? And often in mystical kinds of environments, narrative environments, like you had it in Grimm and in Sleepy Hollow, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., like they're Constantine and the Legends of Tomorrow and all, like there were either holy, kind of like mystical books that had Hebrew in them, or tattoos that had Hebrew letters and characters. Oh, Supernatural had a bunch of, so like anytime that there's like any kind of supernatural show, there's often Hebraic overlap, or a golem shows up, or, just a Dybbuk. So like, I mean, these are classical kind of Jewish elements that show up in these procedurals that are exploring a certain world, and they can only do so much Wicca stuff, I suppose. There's got to be other, voodoo and hoodoo and like all of the mystical arts from all of the various traditions, and that includes Judaism. What's interesting to me is when it actually does reflect something real and it's explained. There's an episode of, I think it's one of the crossover episodes of the CW DC shows, which I don't know if any of you watch, but
I'm the only one. In this family
you're the one.
Who could do it?
There's always one.
I will say I dropped off at one of the Crisis on Infinite multiple backwards Earths because it was too many shows to watch. But I did watch the first 4 or 5 years of The Flash. So whatever was going on in that year.
So there was a crossover. It was a crossover episode. I think it was technically on Arrow, but a bunch of the main characters were missing, and the side characters were trying to figure out where they were. This is a really weird little clip that's on YouTube that I can share with you. And it's one I can't stop talking about, where one of the people is looking at the screen and trying to figure out like what the code means, and then that character is Jewish, and another Jewish character comes over and says it's gematria, which is Jewish numerology. And he explained, and somebody goes,
"Is that
gematria?" Like
Ragman and Felicity Smoke? Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
They were both two very Jewish characters.
Right. So it's like two Jews having a conversation where one of them says, "Oh, it's this Jewish thing." And the other one says, "Of course, how could I not see that?" And I was like, yeah, of course. Naturally, gematria is like the most, is totally a giveaway. But, he explained what gematria is. And then people are like, "Oh, are you saying it's like based in the land in this language of the Talmud and the Bible?" And so it's like this whole thing of explaining what gematria is. And I thought it was super weird because I grew up with going to a day school, having a day school education. And I guarantee you, when I got to Rutgers, if I had said the word gematria to any of my Jewish friends, they would have not known what I was talking about. So I think that those opportunities to like bring in Jewish concepts and then kind of dig down into them and say, well, this is what it is, and this is what it's classically meant. And then of course they used it in a completely crazy context to, that it translated to geolocating coordinates and help them find their friends. But like, it was like a really weird little moment. And so I always like those weird little moments when they come up, because there's like an insider speak to it. But there's also kind of an opportunity to share something about Jewish tradition, whether it's, mystical or interpretive or literal, or performative, a mitzvah, a value, something, I think all of those are opportunities to create more meaning for the characters and more depth for those characters, as opposed to them just being a Jewish character being like, I celebrate Hanukkah. Sorry, no Christmas for me. It's just like, I think that there's more. There's more. And it lets those characters be more. It lets those actors be more, even if they're not Jewish. And I think that's we could transition to that. Like that's a whole situation about, yeah. But
yeah, so actors being Jewish and non-Jewish, I'm going to come to that later. What I want to come to first is you talked about these awesome little moments. I love those little moments because I feel like when one of those moments ends up, back to what Lily was saying, it feels like, oh, the cool kids are talking about it. All right. And I think that's the story of representation, right? You see yourself, and I think you were saying this on the Bagel Report the other day. You see yourself in the thing, then you see it, you can be it, right? You see it, and then you feel like it's real, it's not weird, or that it's okay for people to learn about it. Were you saying that? I think you were saying
that. And in some ways it's similar, although, I always hesitate when I make this comparison, but it's a little bit similar to the conversation about our representation as Jews in the conversation about hate crimes, is kind of similar to our conversation about the visibility of Jewish characters in a medium that is not as diverse as it should be and needs more diversity. So it's part of the larger representation conversation where I want a TV landscape that's filled with all kinds of stories, not just Jewish ones. And for me, obviously, it's interesting to see Jews portrayed in a range of contexts and as a range of, good guys, bad guys, neutral people, annoying people, attractive people, like whatever the story is. The problem is that sometimes it's balanced toward one end and not the positive one. And so there's a lot of people who are very nervous about any representation of Jews on TV. And that's a legacy that was really kind of forged by early Hollywood, where, there were a lot of Jewish people who were involved in creating the Hollywood that we know today, but they were also very intent on diminishing their Judaism in any possible way. And
not, by the way, for fun. It's because that was a function of society at the time. This wasn't they were randomly ashamed of being Jewish, right? Or is that a good?
Well,
is that a
part of it? I mean, it's it's a very complicated thing, and I haven't done the research to be able to state with absolute authority. But my understanding is that there were many people who were very nervous about being in a prominent position, especially one that was financing a major industry, because you got the finance Jews and you've got the media Jews in like one handy little stereotype. And
those stereotypes existed before Hollywood. They were being peddled and used to burn down our villages for a really long time.
Right. But when they were in Video Village, like that's a Hollywood term. But anyway, there's
Becky's our Hollywood sister. She understood.
Oh, okay. So Becky gets it. But I think that that's one of the reasons you have, Metro Goldwyn Mayer and, Louis B. Mayer and like all of the people who like changed their names or made it more Americanized and lived lives that were really completely separated from the Jewish community. It all happened like in the 30s and 40s when it was very precarious in the world to be Jewish and you didn't necessarily want to call attention to it. And so I think that that's part of the history of Hollywood. And it's actually to make it more topical, which I know you said you generally don't do here. There's been a lot of criticism of the new Academy Museum in Los Angeles that it doesn't include a lot of Jewish content. And I noticed it when I went there with my co-host from the Bagel Report, Erin Ben Moshe, and she and I went to see what was up there. And we're like, where are the Jews? Like, what's going on? Like, why aren't we talking about the Jews? Why aren't we talking about the fact that like for years and years, every time there was a Holocaust movie nominated for an Academy Award, it won. Like, because you couldn't ignore the Holocaust. Like that was not gonna, So like they had Steven Spielberg accepting for Schindler's List, but
leave out Carl Laemmle.
Yeah, you don't hear anything about the theater chains. You don't hear anything about the studio heads. There's nothing about that. And maybe they're just afraid to go there. But it was definitely balanced toward, not balanced, but it was definitely weighted toward trying to balance diversity in terms of Black contributions, Latinx contributions. There was a big exhibit
on that's a good thing, right?
Almodovar.
All great things.
Almodovar. Which I think I just pronounced like a Hebrew, like
that's how Lily pronounces it. She says his name all the time.
Right. Almodovar. And then there was a Spike Lee section, and then there was something about like Me Too and moving ahead.
We see what you're saying by doing that, though.
Those
ironically,
are all good things, by the way.
Those are all good things, but if it's ironically, it kind of is ignoring a major part of the story.
Yeah.
It's not good either.
But they're like, that's fine. We put Steven Spielberg in there. That represents that we got it.
And they're also like playing this little game that happens. Also, there's a Grammys museum in Los Angeles too. But in the Grammys Museum, they're like, won't cover anything that hasn't won a Grammy. So this was the Academy Award Museum. So it's not about like Rachel Bloom or Alana and Abby from Broad City. First of all, because they're TV, but also because they haven't won Oscars. So like,
So
that's been something that's been interesting.
when we talk about these oh, sorry, go ahead. I cut you off.
Yeah, I was just wanted to loop back to just kind of say, because I started talking about TV Gone Jewy, and then I didn't like segue into the Bagel Report. So I'll just say that TV Gone Jewy started as kind of like an idea that I did at Limud conferences, which were Jewish education learning conferences, where I pointed out some various points where I thought it was interesting, and people might not know that there was Judaism in these shows, not like Curb Your Enthusiasm, because like, let's face it, we all are.
Seriously.
We're all aware. We're aware. He's nobody's hiding there. So then I started doing these sessions, and then when the pandemic hit, I started doing them online, and I've done about, a dozen of them for various synagogues and JCCs across the country. And that's been really interesting to both like host this and also have the Q&A afterwards, where people tell me about their favorite Jewish moments of representation. And then when I met Erin when she and I were both writing at the Jewish Journal in Los Angeles, and we realized that we really need that there weren't a lot of women talking in this space about Jewish culture and identity. So we created the Bagel Report, and I think we just recorded today our 67th epised, which seems like a lot to me. Yeah, thank you. And today we were able to have Yael Galina on, who is the writer of the new Wonder Years Bar Mitzvah episode.
We were just talking about it.
I'm just talking about her and just talking about it. That's great.
Yeah. So you can.
So when you said you had a pretty big interview, you did have a big interview, and then you're slumming it with our show.
Yeah. No. I had that, and I had another interview this morning for an article I'm writing. But anyway, yes, this is definitely slumming. I definitely feel like, very high and mighty right now. But yeah, I mean, those two projects are kind of related. And, Becky used to ask me if the Expanse was on that page. And the reality is I don't update either of those pages as much as I should, because I'm busy trying to make a living, because neither one of those really was like, a big moneymaker for me.
You need assistance to text you.
I so need assistance.
With pop culture Jewish stuff that they see.
How old are your kids? Do they want to be an intern?
I'd love to. My kids are
already interns for us.
My 10-year-old,
my 5-year-old
is a proud intern of this podcast.
Oh, good.
Only Shy's
works it on the
children
Comic-Con floor. She works it on the Comic-Con floor, but she is an aspiring writer, and you never know. But I don't know if she's ready to do this.
I should maybe ask my nephews, actually. That's not a bad idea.
Or put a call out, because there's so much content out there, and I don't go to Facebook. I don't use
intern
Facebook
for the Bagel Report.
But that's what I'm trying to say. I'm basically asking if we can be interns, because I did, of course, go to your page though, and it's amazing. It's a good reason to go to Facebook. With all those guests.
I found the one reason to go to Facebook.
If anybody's looking for the reason, that's the reason to go to Facebook. And I thought, gosh, how could she possibly cover all the content out there? And, you just basically need to put a call out for people to text you. Yeah. If they catch, different sources. I just want to quickly say that I don't know if this happens to you, and it just happened to you guys, where you get like a pop culture red herring, where the other day I saw that Harry Styles has a Hebrew tattoo. Yeah. You're just like, oh my God, Harry Styles. And you like go down for like that 5 minutes on your phone of like, is Harry Styles Jewish?
Right.
And then you're like, oh no, he just has a Hebrew tattoo.
Right. Harry Styles, David Beckham.
Right. And I'm just,
Regina King.
Are they like into Kabbalism? Like, what is it?
Hebrew tattoos.
In some cases.
The first time I ever saw a Hebrew tattoo was a Jewish summer camp. It was a woman, a little bit older than me, very like prominent leader in the camp. And she had come back from a year in Israel with a big, beautiful Star of David on her back.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I think it was the first tattoo I saw on a Jewish person too.
First tattoo I'd ever seen on a Jewish person, and then a Jewish symbol as a tattoo. Think about it, that our generation are the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, right? We're grandchildren. There's no one really in our generation that are children of Holocaust survivors that I know of, but grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, where particularly, aside from tattooing being against the religion's strict rules, the specific use of tattoos to number Jews before, as they were being rounded up, was an added humiliation. And I remember I was about 13 or 14 when this happened, so Beck and Lil must have been a little bit younger. And the discussion around this, now you see it all the time, people tattooing their Hebrew names, I think is a certain maybe reclamation. I'm terrified to get a tattoo, so it's not my thing. but it's a little weird when a non-Jew is tattooing on themselves. That's like a Jewish person.
I'm just annoyed because I'm like, you made me think you were Jewish for a minute. God,
but I think it's like when non-Jewish people get Hebrew letters tattooed to them, or maybe a Jewish symbol tattooed to them, it shows to me, like, the first thing I think of how deeply they do not understand our culture and the culture that they are marking on their body. Now that's not
would be the same.
The truth. That's not necessarily true. I don't know these people,
or people writing in Arabic.
It is
on their body.
That's what it signals to me.
On the other hand, when someone has Hebrew, I'm like, oh, maybe they like Jews. That's good.
Yeah, that is true.
A
little ally signaling there.
All right, Esther, where do you come down on this?
So, I probably have a couple of stories. I do not have any tattoos. I'm not planning to get any. I mean, I can barely decide what I want for lunch. So I think like finding figuring out what I want to carry on my body for the rest of my life is like, I'm much more likely to get those, those press-on tattoos, because I think those are fun and then they're gone.
Temporary.
Yes, temporary. So when I was blogging back in the day before podcasts and all that good stuff, I actually found a story about I think it was Israeli grandchildren of Holocaust survivors who were tattooing their grandparents' Auschwitz numbers on their arms.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So as a way of tribute to them and to make sure that people don't forget. And this threw the Jewish world into like craziness, because, this is probably 20 years ago. And it was like one of the most popular posts on my blog. Still people like comment on it. It's really, and it's not because of anything I wrote. It's just this idea of like, you're never supposed to forget the Holocaust, right? We all know that. But what form does never forgetting mean? And for these grandchildren, they're like, I feel this so deeply. My grandparent is a part of me. And after they're gone, I want this to serve as a memory of what they went through. And they've been hearing all their lives, remember the Holocaust. And if they're, secular kids who aren't necessarily thinking that, tattooing is fine to do. And if they're going to get like, AC/DC on their arm, or like, why wouldn't you get EMA, or like, the tattoo, like all of these things, like if you're proud of something in a way, it's kind of like a more extreme, version of what kind of t-shirt messaging do you put on, right? So are you going to be wearing the one that's the t-shirt that says, fighting for peace is like fighting for virginity, like, which was an Israeli t-shirt for a while that the Americans used to come home with, the federal booby inspectors, the FBI, like, what are you putting on? Like, what are you trying to say? And, an IDF t-shirt, like, whatever you choose to put on your body, whether it's temporary or permanent, is sending a message. So the question, I think, is about the intent, and like, what is the intent behind that message? And if the intent is pride, is the intent appropriation?
Exactly.
Is it misappropriation? So not only taking something from another culture, but using it in a completely different, terrible context. Like, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity there for parsing what might be an acceptable or unacceptable tattoo in Jewish life. There are places where it's still like anathema, and people still say it's forbidden, but like there's a lot of more liberal sources are like, you can do what you want.
It does seem like the general world has moved on. Not the general world. I mean, again, the more traditional places, it's still forbidden, but there seems to be a lot of more leeway in the less traditional places.
Plus Harry Styles.
Within a generation, plus Harry Styles. Hey there, Friday Night Movie fans. That wraps part 1 of our episode with Esther Kustanowitz. The rest of the episode, part 2, will drop on Friday at your usual time. Thank you for listening. You can follow me at Pancake and the number 4 Table on Twitter and Instagram. You can follow Becky at PaperBK Princess. You can follow Lily at Chichi, Chichik Gomez on Twitter. All the Friday Night Movie shenanigans at Friday Night Movie on Twitter and Instagram. FridayNightMoviePod.com. The theme song is by What Does It Eat? Thanks for listening.
Every time Lily shows up on time for the pod, it's a Shechianu moment.